we need to also ensure that we're doing what is needed to get people out of prison who have previously gotten sentences prior to these changes in laws, and also ensuring that their records are clear. And this is such an important topic. I'm so glad that the Policy Summit is having us here to discuss it, because I want to remind folks that even if we see the full legalization of cannabis, even if at the federal and all the state levels we see that removal of criminal penalties for cannabis moving forward, that doesn't automatically lead to that kind of retroactive relief. So this is a topic that I hope we can keep front of mind in this movement. And I've really been heartened, being in DC this week with all these cannabis advocates, other organizations, that this is really an issue that I have found such broad bipartisan support for. And I think that's because there's a fundamental injustice in that we would change these laws but not do the work to provide that relief for those that have suffered in the past. So I'm really excited today to talk about exactly how we can achieve that. And we've got an amazing group of panelists, so I will let them introduce themselves, and I will start with my colleague, Dante West.
Thank you so much. My name is Dante West. Was incarcerated for 3 years, 8 months in the state of Kansas. Got sentenced to nearly 8 years in prison. And now I work with the Last Prisoner Project to look for other people that are incarcerated on the state level. Super excited just to be with this organization. And it's just an incredible opportunity just to find these different stories of people, and they get out and they tell their stories and they inspire these legislators to make change. Super thankful and excited to talk about what we're talking about today, and I'll pass it over to our good friend at NACDL, Liz.
Hi, good morning. Hi, my name is Liz Bendis, and I'm an attorney with the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers. I'm the head of the Cannabis Justice Initiative, and we file compassionate release motions and clemency petitions on behalf of people who are sentenced to marijuana crimes. I'll talk a little bit about that work later, but I'm so happy to be here and happy to join us. Thank you so much for having me.
Good morning. It is an honor and a pleasure to share this space with you today. My name is Ronald Sousa. I'm the Executive Vice President of an organization called Just Leadership USA. Out of New York City. We are a national criminal justice reform organization committed to improving the conditions of people with lived experience. We have a leadership development program, and we do policy work on the federal and the state level. I served 27 years in the Michigan Department of Correctional and Wrongful Conviction from 1985 to 2012. I was released by the federal courts, and I've come out to do this work, and glad to be part of this panel. Thanks for inviting me.
So Liz, I would love for you to tell us a little bit more about the Cannabis Justice Initiative and really kind of underscore what it's like if we took the approach of what we're kind of left with right now, at least at the federal level, of taking on these cases of people who are still incarcerated for cannabis individually via litigation or clemency, kind of what that looks like and the types of cases that you work on.
Thanks for having me. So as I said, I'm counsel for a project called the Cannabis Justice Initiative. And it's a partnership between the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers and LPP, our wonderful partners at LPP. So we file compassionate release motions and clemency petitions. And what does that mean? So once someone is sentenced and they're incarcerated, they can go back to the federal judge that sentenced them and ask that judge for compassion and mercy to let them out. So we file these motions trying to get these judges to have some kind of compassion and let our clients and let our constituents out. The other thing we do is we file clemency petitions before President Biden. And we're trying to get Biden to grant clemency to our constituents. We have something like 50 petitions before President Biden that he could grant immediately tomorrow. So Each of our clients is worthy of clemency, of course, but we would love for President Biden to grant a categorical clemency for all folks who are inside for marijuana convictions. Now, Biden has granted about 113 petitions, and Obama granted 1,800. So Biden has a lot of work to do. He has a lot of work to do both now and also hopefully after the election. And we are hoping that he will act and grant more clemency petitions. I just wanted to talk about a couple of our clients. So for example, we have clients who are inside for 10, 15, 24 years, and even a life sentence just for marijuana. I'll give you an example. We have a constituent who is 63 years old. He's serving a 23-year sentence. He served 12 years. Because he's 63 years old, he has some health issues that have been exacerbated in prison. His daughter was diagnosed with cancer and is a cancer survivor, and he has children and grandchildren. We filed a compassionate release motion before the court. The court denied that motion. It's the Southern District of Texas. We have a clemency petition for this individual, and it is before President Biden. And so we are really hoping that President Biden will pass that, will grant that petition. We have another constituent who has a 30-year sentence, and they've served 18 years. Over and over again, you can see these persons who are incarcerated for 5, 10, 15, 24 years in prison. So that's what we do, and we can talk more about that in a minute. Yeah.
And I think it's so important not just to tell the stories of these excessive sentences, because I think often there's a misconception that if you're getting a sentence for cannabis, completely victimless cannabis activity wouldn't be lengthy. But of course, because of things like habitual offender laws and mandatory minimums, all of the ways that our sentencing guidelines work to enhance sentences, that's not the case. And we have a number of individuals serving life sentences for cannabis. And to Liz's point, we don't have effective mechanisms for release just trying to do that via litigation. Achieving compassionate release, achieving clemency is exceedingly difficult. But we have 2 success stories here of individuals who are able to fight their own cases and achieve freedom, but that's, again, very, very difficult. And that's why we really need to be working both at the state and federal level to find pieces of legislation that would enact systemic reform, that would put the onus on the state to provide opportunities for release or reductions of sentences for those with cannabis offenses. But again, Dante, you are one of these success stories of someone who had the courage to fight their case. And I just think your story is so inspiring, so I won't spoil it, but I would love for you to talk a little bit about how you were able to achieve your freedom.
Yeah, of course. Back in 2017, like I mentioned before, I got sentenced to nearly 8 years in prison for a pound of marijuana in the state of Kansas, was traveling from California. And ultimately, when I did, kind of just coming in, never traveled outside of California before, and I won't say the story too long, but just seeing those troopers and seeing how officers kind of pick and choose on drivers having out-of-state plates, being people of color, of course. And meanwhile, like I said, I got put over having dirt on my license plate, right? Road grind from traveling. What was a crazy story, right? And pulled over, cleaned the license plates off. Ended up arriving at a friend's house, and he ended up telling him and said he was going to buy a pound of marijuana from me. And his testimony alone convicted me. Ended up going to jury trial, right? And it's something that we talked about at the press conference that is super important. When they did end up sending me to prison, I had to choose a foster family, for my 8, 9-year-old brother, which were very, very young, right? But then eventually, just going and sitting down in prison and keeping them in the back of my mind really motivated me to kind of just really focus on my case, right? And I would see these lifers, to your point, Sarah, just fighting to go home, right? And they had various charges, and I felt like if I applied that same energy with people like myself, I would have an opportunity to go home. I ended up losing in direct appeal, but eventually, I wrote like 125 state representatives. I wrote 40 senators on the state level. 4 people actually even wrote me back, right? Coincidentally, 2 Republicans, 2 senators, which is really remarkable. One actually came and see me in the middle of COVID. His name was State Rep. Willie Dove out of Leavenworth. And he couldn't believe that the laws he was passing were having people serve a significant time for marijuana. And just ultimately just having that focus of just reuniting with your family. We talked about it earlier at the press conference, like how important it is, like when people do go to prison, for cannabis or whatever it may be, right? But in particular cannabis, you're missing your family, and they're taking you away from it. And that's how recidivism starts, right? When you don't have a parents in the household and different things like that. So just really being focused inside the prison, writing that motion. I think I was going to get this clemency. She was a former Congresswoman, Karen Bass, had heard about my case, really talked to the governor, and I thought I had a great opportunity, especially with the response I got from the legislators, but ultimately, filed a habeas corpus motion. A lawyer came and seen me in 2020, and I eventually got my case exonerated and dismissed, in 21. So it shows that how many more people are like Dante or my good friend over here. And I think at the last Prisoner Project, we do a real good point of just finding a story, finding ways we can help, in partnership with NACDO, and just finding ways, whether it be passing a legislation through our policy team or finding an individual that we can help is super essential.
Thank you for that, Dante. And again, I think that just shows, you can have all of the support in the world. You can have prominent individuals backing you. You can have the best lawyers that money can buy. If you're that privileged to have that, and that doesn't mean that you're going to be successful, especially in the clemency. I mean, any kind of post-conviction litigation, it's so up to the whims of a judge, and they can, or an executive officer, and it's just not easy to achieve when you look at the success rates of these kinds of cases. They're exceedingly low. So to you for achieving your freedom, but that's certainly not the trajectory of most of these cases. And so for lawmakers who say, well, there's already a path to relief via the judicial system, that's not effective, and that's not justice. There's a reason why we call it the criminal legal system and not the criminal justice system, because justice is so absent from taking a case through trial, through litigation, especially in the post-conviction setting. But something you touched on was how your incarceration impacted not just yourself, but your family. And of course, that's something we hear so frequently from our constituents. And Ronald, of course, something that you can speak to. And there's not only that impact on your family and your community, but there's the lasting consequences of just, once you're free, having a conviction on your record. Can you kind of talk about just the burden and, the effect of that on someone who has a conviction?
Absolutely, that's a great question. I'd like to thank Dante. Congratulate him on his success. Great job. Because getting released on your own and doing pro se is amazing. You talk about clearance of records, and I would call it expungement. And that's just very, very important, because the exclusions that will be created by not clearing a person's record will cause many people to be ineligible for basic human needs and necessities, which means perpetuation of collateral consequences for the individual, such as denying them access to housing, access to employment, access to the basic services they need to be successful citizens. And this would create, to me, increase the likelihood of bad outcome, including increased recidivism for impacted individuals. Record clearance is a public safety issue, in my opinion, because records keep people from having full access to the opportunities that can make them successful in society. And if the goal is public safety, then ensuring that previously convicted people have access to housing, food, assistance, and other basic necessities is essential in making that a reality.
Absolutely. And that's why I think we can't lose sight of these two pillars of retroactive relief. A, actually releasing individuals from incarceration, But the work doesn't end there. If you're still on supervision, if you still have a conviction on your record, you're not fully free. That's not true freedom. There are so many barriers that continue to exist. And so when we do this work, it's not enough to just release people from incarceration. We have to do that follow-up work of ending supervision and removing those convictions from records. Currently, we've seen more of a trend in states to provide that kind of systemic relief, both in the forms of reduction or elimination of sentences, but also record clearance. And I think particularly that uptick in automatic record clearance for cannabis offenses. And I think that, to me, I have a lot of optimism there because we've seen cannabis reform really be the vehicle for broader criminal justice reforms, but the work is certainly not done there. There's a lot of fight left, even in states that have done this. It's often very limited. It's limited to simple possession, lower kinds of offenses, and at the federal level, we don't have this. So, Liz, could you talk a little bit about the non-litigation at the federal level? What opportunities exist? Are there any pieces of legislation that you think are giving you hope to kind of provide this systemic reform?
So we do have some good news that the Cannabis Administrative and Opportunity Act, I know that there are some Senators Schumer, Wyden, and Booker are now looking for co-sponsors for this law, and it would end cannabis prohibitions by removing cannabis from the Controlled Substances Act, and it would also provide our clients, people like our clients, the opportunity to get resentenced by their judge. So that's a bright spot now, and so it's in the works. You want to call your congresspeople and you want to call your senators and ask them to pass the CAOA. It's really important. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is, like I said, we need President Biden to step up and grant clemency for all folks who are inside for marijuana. And that's something that we should pressure President Biden to do as well. This is, like I said, our constituents deserve this relief themselves because as individuals, but every person who is in prison deserves clemency. Everyone who is in prison for marijuana deserves clemency. So those are two sort of across the board federal actions that could be done in order to release folks who are inside for cannabis. The last thing to say is that you might have heard about President Biden granting clemency for persons who are convicted of marijuana possession, right? And so the administration is talking up the fact that they have granted relief for folks who have a federal possession offense. And let me just tell you that it didn't release anyone from prison. In fact, none of our constituents were actually affected by this law. People are not necessarily prosecuted for marijuana possession anymore, and they don't serve the long sentences. And so when President Biden or VP Kamala Harris brag about the thousands of people that they have released from prison, it's actually, it's not as far-reaching as we'd like. So again, this is about granting clemency to folks who, anyone who's incarcerated for cannabis crimes.
And I think highlighting the clemency power is really important because I've said this before, these aren't novel issues. It's not like there's a lot about cannabis reform and how we build an equitable industry that are complex questions. This kind of reform, we have a framework for it. We have models. Presidents in the past have used categorical clemency, and President Biden has used categorical clemency with these pardons. He could easily do the same thing for commutations. He could literally, with the stroke of a pen, provide relief to over 3,000 individuals still sitting in federal prison for cannabis. So the framework is there, and similarly at the congressional level, the framework is there. We have states that have successfully adopted these models for retroactive relief. The federal government could be the same. So there is hope in some of the bills that we have forthcoming, and we just need our elected officials to have the will and the courage to act on Dante, I want to turn it back to you. It's just been incredible to see after your release, you've come out and really been able to use your story to inspire others. Can you talk about the importance of advocacy in this work and education and informing the public on this issue?
Yeah, one of the things I experienced once getting released was I had met with the district attorney on my case, and he still wanted to give me a felony, right? And I just didn't understand why, because I feel like one, I didn't do the crime, but two, a felony is something that's, wild, right? Especially watching TV and watching Van Jones, right? He was explaining how felony affected people of color. More importantly, so I met with the district attorney, and my defense lawyer was like, you should do it. That's kind of, we bridged the gap to that. But ultimately, I got to spoke with him, and he asked me what I wanted, and I asked him that I wanted to get my case into a misdemeanor where I can work it off, right? And he said, why, right? And I explained to him that if I went back to Stockton, California, where I'm from, and had to go get my brothers out of foster care, I would have to live in a certain neighborhood. I would have to not be able to vote, Things would be really harder, right? The kids would go to a great school, whatever the case may be. And he said to give me a lot to think about. Eventually he said, I'll call you back next week. I'll call your attorney next week. We'll figure it out. And then he called me 10 minutes later to dismiss my case. And he was the most conservative district attorney, in the state, right? And that's how we're going to solve, really the war on drugs. It's not really the people saying, the legislators that already support us, the people that are saying no. And I noticed that, he told me, after the fact that he was like, I didn't know how much a felony affected Black America, right? And he was serious. He wasn't, I don't believe he was racist or anything, but I think the education part was so important to the public. And I think it's the stories, right? When we get a constituent out, we got a guy, in Kevin Allen served a life for 2 grams of marijuana, never committed a violent offense. But when people get out and they hear the stories, they can't believe it, right? And it's like a light, right? You get a person out, they tell the story, and then it shows, right? And it may not be me that inspires somebody, but if I can get someone out and they inspire somebody and that person does it, it's a domino effect, right? Because if you're not a conversation at the dinner table, when that legislator goes home or that judge goes home, the change is going to be really, really hard, right? And one thing I would say, the greatest gift you can give somebody is freedom, right? Not money, not anything else. And I think that's really important. The education of the people is really important.
Absolutely, and I've seen it. I saw it this morning. When you meet with congressional leaders, you share your story, you can see hearts and minds changing, and I've seen the power of telling these stories of unjust incarceration for cannabis really be able to move the needle with lawmakers on all sides of the aisle. And Ronald, I have found such an inspiration in the work that you and Just Leadership are doing with this as well. And something that I think is also gives me hope about this industry and legalizing cannabis is that if we do it correctly, we can create opportunities for individuals who have been impacted. Do you see that with this burgeoning industry that we can find ways beyond the retroactive relief that we've talked about to give opportunities to impacted individuals?
Oh, yeah, for sure. To speak to the storytelling piece you mentioned, you read my mind about hearts and minds change. Part of the work that we do at Just Leadership is leadership development training for people with lived experience. And one of the things we do is teach them how to tell their stories. And because stories is what's going to change the hearts and minds, if you don't have heart and mind change, reform is not going to be sustainable. So storytelling is very, very important. As far as, the support system and opportunities for people with lived experience in cannabis convictions, she mentioned the Cannabis Administration Opportunity Act earlier. And the act, while it does a number of things in terms of marketplace, the legislation directs funding to reinvest in communities that have been directly impacted by cannabis prohibition. And it helps improve the diversity and inclusion among licensed operators and regulated cannabis markets. Community inclusion is important because it allows them to be able to own farms and dispensaries and actively participate in the free economy, the burgeoning economy of the cannabis market. So the CO, the Cannabis Administration Act will help open those up to some degree. And also, my good friends Marissa see here in the audience with the Drug Policy Alliance and the Marijuana Justice Coalition are working around to amend the MORE Act and to seek to add additional layer of protection by providing cannabis-specific protection for workers. If they're successful in doing so, the industry will add industry-specific protections for cannabis workers, will improve economic health and personal safety of cannabis workers through the rapid implementation of industry-specific standards from OSHA, and will also ban child labor by amending the Fair Labor Standards Act. So there is some work being done, there's some stuff being done in legislating and good people around the country working on these issues, and hopefully there's some positive results.
Yeah, and again, I think that piece really does give me so much hope because, again, we've seen cannabis reform be this vehicle for broader criminal justice reform that I hope can be a blueprint for things outside of cannabis offenses. But I see that in the potential of this industry as well. You know, I think we're trying to build a framework for an equitable industry that includes those kinds of protections, that empowers impacted workers and owners of these businesses. And so that's hopefully something that, you know, we can model with this industry that will have impact beyond just cannabis. But I want to thank all of you fantastic panelists for being with us today, for talking about your work. The work that you're doing is amazing. And I think we have 2 minutes for questions. If anyone has questions. Oh, no, we don't have If you have questions, get our contact info. Thank you all for being here, and thank you to the Policy Summit for having us.
Thank you.